Welcome into the official Jets podcast.
I eat, breathe, and sleep the New York Jets, my team.
That is a tightrope walk across Niagara Falls. That's hard to do.
It's a game of inches, so finding that one little inch to be successful, it all matters.
The official Jets podcast is presented by Kendra Scott, the jewelry company that's shining bright and doing good. Shop game day ready jewelry styles and so much more at kendrascott.com.
Okay, gentlemen, NFL draft has come and gone. Baldy's joining us from Los Angeles, and I think, Duz, you're in Florida, right?
I am in the great sunny state of Florida.
How you guys feeling this morning?
I'm good, man. But, this draft, fans could talk about it 24/7, but it's eventually, you got to, do it and then just let it go. Because, honestly, none of these guys, everybody wants to have them in the Pro Bowl. These guys they're just getting started. They're just all getting started.
All right, well, let's put a bow on the Jets 2025 draft, shall we? Baldy, what were your thoughts on the way GM Darren Mougey, head coach Aaron Glenn navigated their first draft?
I thought it was excellent. I mean, they had real needs, and they found real value in those needs, starting with Armand Membu, who was an elite prospect, all right, from his size, his movement, his production, what he did at Missouri, and then to get Mason Taylor, a position of real need that many thought maybe they would spend their seventh pick on a tight end, and they elected to go the other way. But they got the two big positions of need for the offense to really help out Justin Fields, to give him the best opportunity. I thought the Jets have been struggling for years to really build a really talented offensive line. They were never able to quite get there. And I feel like they've got the pieces in place to be a really good group right now.
Deuce, did you feel vindicated? You've been picking Membu for months to the Jets.
Yeah, me and Baldy were kind of kidding. We kind of always knew that was going to be the pick. You got to think, you just read in between the lines. Aaron Glenn coming over from Detroit, how did they build it? Throughout the trenches. They have one of the best offensive lines in football, and there was one void on that offensive line, and you had a player that could easily fill that void in Armand Membu. It wasn't a guy that you had to take and then cross-train him to the other side because he hadn't done it. He's played right tackle his whole career, so it just made too much sense when you talk about him being young, the upside, the athletic ability, and then just the dog mentality that he has fits what Aaron Glenn wants to do. And then to echo what Baldy was saying, when you look at this offensive line, the last time the Jets were true contenders, you're talking about 2010, 2011, it was built through that offensive line.
Yeah.
So Aaron Glenn, again, Tanner Enstring, coming from Detroit, it was built through the offensive line. And then the Jets have one of the youngest offensive lines. So now this group can grow together. Literally, the oldest player or starter or projected starter on the offensive line for the Jets is 27 years old. I don't know many other teams could say that right now about their offensive line.
Baldy, what do you like most about Membu's game? And as he makes this transition, what is he going to have to work on?
Well, the NFL level, you're just going to see great players every single week. It's, you don't get that in college. And so it's about being consistent with your technique. I think all these young guys, they're going to get stronger. I think he can get stronger with the upper body, where he just locks guys out and then he just ends the pass rush. He's got you can see it in flashes where he can do that, and he has done that. But, you just love his movement. There's so many things you can do with an athletic tackle. With the perimeter game, the quick game, getting to the second level, cutting off on the backside, all those things he will be able to do just naturally. Then it's a question of all the, he's got to work with Olivier Tucker. You want to become the right side, the communication that you need to handle stunts, to handle, any kind of movement up front. So to take the thinking out of it, where you could just react. He's got to get to that stage, and that will come, but that will come with reps. And then it's a question of how quickly does it come? How quickly do they build this bond that great offensive lines have, where it's literally five guys with one mind. And, the communication normally starts from the center, Tippmann, it goes left, it goes right. That's what's got to come right now with Armand. But the actual ability is there. And that's where it's got to start, because he's going to see some of the best pass rushers in the league right now are coming over the right tackle. And so, you go up to Buffalo and you see what they put over that right tackle. That's a good football player right there. So that's what he's got to get ready for.
Dudes, I like it that there's no projection that he's moving positions, that
Yeah.
he'll have an opportunity to win that right tackle spot, and that's where he was entrenched in at Missouri. I just wanted to move the conversation forward here, dudes. I think for a long time we're debating whether it was going to be tackle or perhaps tight end, and most people were looking at Tyler Warren there. Ironically, the Bears take Colston Loveland off the board and number 10 overall. Warren slips, or I don't even want to say slips, but he goes to 14 to Indianapolis. How much do you think it went into the thinking for the Jets that if we're going to get our tackle, we better get one now because we have an opportunity to actually come back in the second round and get a tight end? And how about the way that worked out for them, getting Mason Taylor at number 42 overall?
Yeah, without a doubt, you build it in the trenches, and those guys tend to go faster. I believe, the top tackles went really early in this draft. We talk about Will Campbell going 4 overall, then Armand Membu going 7, Calvin Banks going 9. So there was a run on, the top 3 tackles, and the Jets didn't want to take a chance to potentially, go tight end and then miss out on a day 1 starter at tackle in the second round because, again, those tackles went fast. And even Josh Simmons went at the end of the first round. So, you would have missed out on him. Josh Connerly, you would have missed out on him because he went at the end of the first round. So I thought it was strategic by Darren Mougey and also Arian Glenn to realize, when you talk about positional value, the offensive tackle is higher than the tight end position, and we can get a really good tight end in the second round. As a matter of fact, they got everybody or mostly everybody's tight end 3 in the second round. So I thought they played it the right way.
Baldy, I love those draft calls that we see on draft weekend, specifically Mason Taylor's draft call. Offensive coordinator Tanner Engstrand got on there, and he was pumped. He said, listen, we got a plan for you. Engstrand comes from the Lions, of course. How do you envision Taylor working in this offense?
Well, anybody that's watched Detroit, the number 1 offense in football, you watch Sam Laporta, the day he came out of Iowa, and what he has been able to do in that offense. All the crossing routes, all the movement and things that they do, the 2 tight end sets that you'll get with Ruckert right now and Mason Taylor. They were a big 2 tight end set. It helped them in the run game. The motions, the pre-snap motions that they would do with Laporta, you're going to see the same thing with Mason Taylor. That's what you saw at LSU. He probably was in motion every single play, changing the strength, looking for matchups. So he's been doing a lot of these things, but I can just take just a snapshot of Detroit's offense, from the offensive line to the tight ends to how they work the tight ends. I can see a lot of that playbook coming to the New York Jets right now.
Interesting tight end room now, dudes, because you're adding him to a guy that you like in Stone Smart, and Jeremy Ruckert's going to have an opportunity to play some more now that Tyler Conklin departed.
Yeah, and I'm so glad Brady brought that up as far as Detroit living in 12 personnel, which is 1 back, 2 tight end. Because I look at it like this: Jeremy Ruckert's probably going to be their Brock Wright, right? And Mason Taylor is going to be the Sam Laporta that Tanner Engstrand had in Detroit. So I could definitely see them coming out in 2 tight end sets. And then even they like some 13 personnel near the red zone and in the goal line as well. So Stone Smart will be the 3rd guy that they use to not only run the ball, but also heavy play action pass. Stone Smart's a big, tall receiver. He can go up and get the football. So it'll be interesting to see how inventive Tanner Engstrand can be with this tight end group of Stone Smart, Mason Taylor, and also Jeremy Ruckert.
Not really surprised there with the first 2 picks, especially the positions when you're speaking tackle, tight end. But I think the Jets surprised some folks in the 3rd round there, Baldy, getting Florida State cornerback Zaire Thomas out of Florida State. Aaron Glenn likes his corners big, and this guy is big, and he's physical.
Well, you just keep turning the page back to Detroit. They signed Carlton Davis, who is a big, long corner last year. They drafted Terrion Arnold in the 1st round. Sometimes you got to match up with these receivers. And the one thing about Azera was, when you watch him in Florida State, he's a big 6'1.5" corner, 200 pounds, and he's not afraid to get his hands on guys. And you don't see a lot of press corners in college. You just don't. And so the way that they play zones and these defenses, you don't see that, but you see a lot of that at Florida State. So to me, I thought Darren, it was clearly this is the best player on our board. Like, because, me and dudes are like, man, defensive tackle, there was a rich class of defensive tackles. Yeah. You could have said that, but maybe the way that they stacked their board, Thomas was their next best player at number 73. And so they took the best player available. And look, honestly, everybody needs 4 corners. In any game, you need 4 corners that can play. And so we know they've got 3 starters out there, especially with getting Brandon Stevens in free agency. And so I think that's what you got. You got yourself a press corner that, whether it's you're going up against a team that's playing 10 personnel in Buffalo, whatever it is, you might need that 4th corner on the field. But in the rotation, you'd love to have a guy that has that ability and that length at that position.
Dudes, you guys both were there in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. How much do you think he specifically, Thomas, elevated his stock, what he did there?
Yeah, he showed what he did all year long at Florida State. Now, there wasn't a lot to like about what you saw on film from Florida State this past year, but him and Josh Farmer were 2 of the brighter spots, right? And he showed versus Kyle Williams, who was, to me, the best separator in this class when it comes to the receiver position. They had some really classic battles out there in Mobile, and that's the thing that he does. Like, where other DBs struggled in those one-on-one situations, because Baldy, it's slated for the offense to win in one-on-ones with receivers and DBs. He actually elevated his game during those scenarios because that's what he does on a daily basis. And Baldy hit this on the head earlier, talking about a lot of these kids play more zone in college. Well, that's where you kind of get exposed to man coverage when it's one-on-one situations. And that's where he really solidified himself and showed that he could be a press man cover corner. I think being there in the 3rd round was a surprise to AG and Darren Mougey because to Baldy's point, this was a rich defensive tackle class, and there was a run in the 2nd round. And then Darius Alexander fell to the 1st round in the 1st pick in the 3rd round. So maybe he was a consideration as well, but he was also gone by the time they picked. They looked at their board, they looked at where the next defensive tackle was maybe, and they said, Thomas on the board was significantly higher than the next defensive tackle. So we're going to get most bang for our buck with the value with getting Thomas here, and I think that's why they took him in the 3rd round.
Baldy, we thought the Jets were going to add receiver at some point early. Day 3 starts with Arian Smith out of Georgia. What can you say about his physical skill set?
Well, I mean, he's got world-class speed. I think he runs a 10-1-8 100 meters, which is world-class, right? But, there's speed and then there's football speed. This guy separates. Like, this guy, when you watch him, he's fast because he's going up against SEC cornerbacks and defenses, and he's running by people. Now, he needs to go get married to a jug machine, and he needs to get on. I mean, because, look, the guy has not had a lot of production at Georgia, and he wasn't on the field a lot. They had a lot of other talented guys. He had to kind of wait his time, and, he made the best of it this year. But for the most part, this is a guy that you can't teach this kind of speed. And he's going to open up things underneath for a lot of players. And I keep going back to Detroit. I mean, this is what they have, with one of their elite players in Williams there. And this is the prototype right here. Get a guy that can fly. Now, he's not polished yet. There's a lot he's got to learn. But the raw talent is there at that position.
All right, dudes. So when a receiver has problems with drops, is that something that you can coach it out of him? Meaning, it was interesting last weekend because Baldy talked about Jameson Williams. Aaron Glenn talked about Jameson Williams and, the scouting report on him coming out and his difficulties with drops. Is it can it be a physical thing that turns into a mental thing, or is it more mental when you're talking about drops? This is a kid who averaged 19.9 yards of reception at Georgia. And the other thing that I really like is he's got a mentality. He's not just like, oh, I'm a speed finesse guy. He brings a physicality to the game, and I think immediately he's going to contribute on special teams. You always want that on your day 3 picks.
Yeah, without a doubt. You go back to the Jamison Williams comparison. He definitely struggled. He came in with an injury, but he
Mhm.
struggled his first full year playing in regards to drops. And people were wondering, dang, did Detroit potentially reach too early for this guy? And then he was able to put it together. To me, it's more of a mental confidence thing. And Baldy, this you covered the game for a long time. Like there tends to be a mental block once you drop one pass, then you
Mhm.
drop another, then you drop another. And the only way to get over that is to continue to go out there and try to catch the football. Like once you finally catch the ball, your confidence is going to go out of this world. So I think for him, it's going to be a mental thing. And he has one of the best receiver coaches in Sean Jefferson to help instill some of that confidence into him to hopefully get him over that hump. Because going back past last year in the 23 season, didn't have issues with drop passes. It was only this past season. And then even at the Senior Bowl, he dropped a few as well. So you would hope that they could instill some confidence in the young man and he could get back to where he was in the 23 season.
Real quick. I'd love to see, that daily competition with him and Sauce. I think it's like
Mhm.
his speed is going to make Sauce really stretch those hamstrings before practice. But, you go up against a long corner like that. I mean, that should help him in practice out there. Like just the whole iron sharpens iron type thing.
Baldy, on that subject, how does it change the dynamic defensively when the Jets put a guy like Smith out there on the field? Your number one gun on the outside is Garrett Wilson. You've fortified that offensive line, but then if you got Smith out there and the safety knows he's out there on the field, what is it going to do for everybody else?
Well, your safeties are not going to be nosy. They're not, they're going to line up. They're going to give themselves an extra step. The corners are going to do their scouting report and they're going to go, nobody wants to get beat. Nobody wants, somebody to run by them on tape. Nobody wants that on the resume. And so you naturally start backing up a little bit when you got a guy. We saw it with Jamison Williams. Like I would expect
Mhm.
some of the things that they did do with Jamison, like the end arounds and reverses and stuff, put the ball in his hands and let him go to work. I mean, that's what they did. But you saw the safeties were backing up before the ball was snapped with him in the lineup and in key spots. And so I can see defenses have the same fear that speed puts in you.
Yeah, and to that point, Baldy, right? When you talk about Garrett Wilson eating up the middle of the field, because you talk about Tanner Enstring coming over from Detroit, those pass concepts where you run that deep dig, and when I say deep dig, you run 10 yard, 15 yards down the field, and you break inside, right? You have
Mhm.
that linebacker that's in zone coverage. Well, because Garrett Wilson is a guy you want to get the ball to, what he does is he just runs a quick little 10 yard stop route, and then everybody collapses on him. Now you have a guy behind him wide open. And that's what Detroit did with
Mhm.
Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown, because Amon-Ra St. Brown is one of the best slot receivers in football, and he tears up the middle of the field. Garrett Wilson has that same skill set. Now with the speed of Arian Smith, he can do some of the things that J-Mo did in Detroit to free up Garrett Wilson, because if you get nosy, you're going to give up a 15-yard dig route every single play because everybody's colliding on Garrett Wilson.
All right, Baldy, let's get a last word from you because you got to catch a plane, and I'm sure you're going to be swimming with the sharks here in a couple hours. Aaron Glenn said we're looking for tough, physical, violent, aggressive, and resilient players. What did you see from him? I want to comment from you overall on AG and Mougey, the way they attacked this thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's comps out there to Armand Menmu, to Jason Peters, who's going to the Hall of Fame that the Eagles basically had for most of their career. But I mean, just an explosive body type, that can, walk guys off the line of scrimmage. And Mason Taylor is a much better blocker than anybody probably talked about. They just talked about him as a flex tight end, but he's going to get his share of stalemates. Azaria is like he's getting his hands on guys and stoning guys at the line of scrimmage. He doesn't seem like, I know he didn't run a fast 40 time, but he didn't seem like he had any fear of getting his hands on guys and winning at the line of scrimmage. And for me, I want my receivers that are going up against my corners to have to work to get off the line of scrimmage, to have to work on their releases all week, knowing you're going to have two hands in the chest. And then Malachi, look, you start for 5 years at Alabama. Like that, first of all, you got to get through practice at Alabama, and that's a challenge by itself. Then game days probably in some cases especially when Nick was there. Like game days were a relief probably over what they did in practice. And so there's a mentality of a toughness, big programs that these guys came from that they're bringing to the Jets right now.
All right, get out of here, Baldy. Great job as always.
All right, guys. Take care, man.
The Official Jets podcast is presented by Kendra Scott, the jewelry company that's shining bright and doing good. Shop game day ready jewelry styles and so much more at kendrascott.com.
Hey, dudes, the pod carries on, man. He just mentioned Malachi Moore. Man,
Yeah.
played 5 seasons there at Alabama, and they used him all over the place. With that being said, how do you envision him coming in and working in the defensive backfield?
Yeah, I know we talked about this pre-draft, but when you look at the makeup of the roster, there's a significant amount of free safeties on this roster. When you talk about Tony Adams, you talk about Andre Cisco, also Isaiah Oliver with the ability to play free safety and some slot corner as well. By trade, Malachi Moore is a free safety. But because of the lack of foot speed, and I don't say that disrespectfully because he has great instincts and he tracks the ball extremely well, I believe he transitions to strong safety because he's a tone setter in that secondary. Like when he hits you, you feel it. And you could tell he plays with a tenacity and physicality that Aaron Glenn and Darren Mougey were looking for in this draft. So I think he's a guy that can play in the box. Matter of fact, at Alabama, they blitzed him a lot off the edge, EA. He was a guy that was constantly in the box. There were sometimes he literally disguised like he was blitzing, and then he would get to the middle of the field, right? Because he just has the wherewithal and instincts to do that. So I think this is a guy that can transition into the box. He actually played some slot corner for them as well. So he definitely has the short area quickness to be able to cover tight ends down in the flat, down the seam, but also be that extra guy and run defense that you need in the box.
A heady ball player. He had 15 and a half tackles for loss there with the Crimson Tide, 31 PDs. And while you're saying he's not the biggest guy, he's going to go in there and he's going to tackle. He's not afraid of contact at all. He's going to mix it up. So it's going to be interesting to see once he gets on the field behind me here at One Jets Drive, how he's going to be used in that secondary.
Yeah, without a doubt. Again, I think he makes that transition to strong safety, and I think, AG kind of even, said these words that he'll have an opportunity to compete to start this year, and they'll also use him on special teams because let's not forget at Alabama, not only was he a starter on defense at safety, but he was a starter on special teams. So he has elite game experience when it comes to being a special teams player. So I think he'll, in that phase of the game, definitely make an immediate impact for the Jets.
Let's talk about a couple hurricanes, shall we? You're down in Florida. Kiko Mauigoa. Thumper, right? Guy who played middle linebacker there at Miami, started his career at Washington State, grew up in American Samoa, had a long journey to get to this point. But he's a guy who really gets after it, and maybe he becomes a core special teamer for you.
Yeah, without a doubt. You take him in the 5th round. This is another physical player, right? Those were the attributes that Darren Mougey and Aaron Glenn were looking for. This is a guy that gets downhill in a hurry now, has struggled at times when it comes to disengaging off offensive linemen, but he's a guy that they also used in blitzing at Miami frequently, and he's a really good blitzer and knows how to get to the quarterback. And if you know anything about, Coach Wilkes and also Aaron Glenn, they like to bring pressure. So that's something that probably piqued their interest when looking at his film. And also in zone coverage, he's a pretty good athlete. He knows how to match. When I say match zone, when somebody comes into your zone area, he essentially turns it into man and matches really well with those receivers or tight ends. He does a really good job doing that. And then Tyler Barron is a guy I really like. I think his comp for me is similar to Jermaine Johnson when he was coming out, right? Very physical guy. He bends tight ends backwards at the point of attack. He's a guy that also rushes with power, but also developed, I would say, after the season when he was at the East-West and really showed a bevy of different pass rush moves. So there's high upside there as a pass rusher. So I think you get another good player in the 5th round with really good value that they traded up for and when you look at the edge group, right, behind Jermaine Johnson, who's coming off a major injury, and also Will McDonald, who had double-digit sacks, there's a lot of young and youthful guys behind that. So you want to be able to add to that room, especially if you think there's really good value in Tyler Barron in the 5th round.
What do you make of the connections to Jason Taylor here? former Jet, of course.
Yep.
Mason Taylor had a year here growing up in New York City. And also, when you talk about the edge there in Tyler Barron, his position coach at Miami was Jason Taylor.
Yeah, without a doubt. So a lot of connections between one Just Drive and those guys that were either drafted from Miami or a guy whose dad played here, right? And Mason Taylor. So you love the family connection and then also the coaching connection. It'll be great to see probably Jason Taylor come back around more now that his son is going to be playing in the green and white. Now again, he has to be on the field on Saturdays because he has to coach his edge guys at the University of Miami. But I'm sure he's going to do his best to make sure he makes it a few of Mason Taylor's games. So you always talk about bloodlines when it comes to athletes, and he has an elite bloodline with his father being a Hall of Famer, a Ring of Honor member for the Miami Dolphins. Again, you talked about how he played here in New York, so they're really familiar with the area as well. And then also Barron, I'm sure he's talking to Jason Taylor as well as far as him making that transition from Miami up here. Let's not forget he transferred from Tennessee, going to Miami. Now he's going to be coming to New York, and his coach played here a year.
Okay, so the Jets, they did not add a quarterback in this draft. Obviously, they signed Justin Fields in free agency. He was a priority. He's 26 years old, former first-round pick, did a lot of good things with Pittsburgh last year. He's going to have a big-time opportunity here with the Jets. Tyrod Taylor, he's a backup quarterback. Jordan Travis here. Adrian Martinez, neither of those guys have taken an NFL snap. We wondered before the draft, hey, are the Jets going to take a developmental passer? We all thought maybe that's a possibility. They didn't in the draft, but they did sign Brady Cook, Armand Membu's teammate at Missouri, as an undrafted free agent. What's the scouting report on Cook?
Really love that signing by the New York Jets. If we go back to the 23 season, this was a guy heading into 24 that a lot of people consider a second round pick, maybe even in the back of the first round. Right now, he was plagued by injuries this last year at Mizzou and just didn't look right at times, held on to the ball a little bit too long. But again, going back to that 23 tape, it was really good. Athletic quarterback that they use in the run games at times at Mizzou. And it's a guy that can really spin it. Let's not forget he was throwing to Theo Weiss and also Luther Burden III out there. And going back to that 23 season, we saw how explosive Luther Burden was with Cook as the quarterback. So this is a guy that, again, you're getting really good value in as an undrafted free agent because going into this season, many consider him going in the first 2 rounds.
How about this when you talk about Cook and his athleticism? Intriguing, man. 4.59 in the 40, 37-inch vertical, 10'8" broad jump. So he's a dual threat himself in terms of he can give you some juice with his legs. And,
Correct.
He's going to be a guy that's going to be interesting to watch here in the spring and the summer.
Without a doubt. Now, again, you never know how roster construction is going to end up happening right before the season. Do the Jets only keep 2 quarterbacks? Do they potentially keep a third? So I think he'll fit in right in with, the Adrian Martinez's of the world in regards to competing for that third spot or maybe even a practice squad spot to develop on his roster. And who knows, right? Say he develops really well. Could he potentially be in competition the following year for a backup role? That's going to be determined. But I really do like the signing by the Jets to bring Cook in.
Deuce, roster building, it's never over. There's never a period at the end of the sentence. But as we sit here a couple hours removed, a little bit punchy, I would say both of us are, after a draft weekend. What do you make of the Jets roster right now?
Yeah, so when you look at it in the draft, and I always say this, EA, you build through the draft and you kind of fill a few voids through free agency, right? And I think they did a really good job with that combination of filling some much needed voids in free agency when you talk about the defensive tackle position. Now, I know that's an area that I think everybody's surprised they didn't attack in the draft because this may have been the deepest defensive tackle draft that we ever seen. But it also goes to show you that they stuck to their board, right, EA? When you talk about taking Membu first round, taking Mason Taylor second round, there may have been a defensive tackle there in the third round, but the value of taking Thomas outweighed taking that defensive tackle for need in the third round. And then, when you come back in the fifth round, and they had to trade and give away some picks to move up to get Tyler Barron, which, again, I think was an under the radar need as far as getting a third defensive end behind Jermaine Johnson and Will McDonald as well as far as edge guy. I say defensive end because we're still trying to figure out between Steve Wilkes and Aaron Glenn what this defense will actually look like, right? Will it be a traditional 4-3 that Wilkes likes to run, or will it be a 3-4 that Aaron Glenn likes to run? So I'm just going to say edge defender behind Will McDonald and also Jermaine Johnson. So I think getting Barron there in the 5th round was actually really smart as well. So when you look at it, is there still maybe question marks at a safety position? Could they potentially still sign a vet there, right? Could they maybe sign another, vet edge or defensive tackle? I think that could be a possibility. People forget, EA, that there's waves of free agency, right?
Yeah.
There's the opening week, then there's that second tier, then there's a tier after the draft when you feel like you want to, there's still some voids on your team and maybe you can fill a void here and there. You'll start to see more guys sign, I would say, leading up to training camp and even into training camp as teams discover what their roster is truly like and voids they have on their roster.
It's not as if they did not address defensive tackle and free agency. They had to, just because the body's coming and gone, right?
Correct.
I mean, they got Jay Tufele. Obviously, they also added Byron Cowart and then Derek Nottie. He's the guy who he might be stationed next to Quinnen Williams on early downs, run downs. He comes from Kansas City, a lot of experience there. And then the other guy that I just wanted to throw a name at you, Leonard Taylor did some interesting things his first year. So I don't think we should forget about him as part of the equation either.
Yeah, and you look at him essentially like a draft pick because you got kind of stole him as an undrafted free agent, right? And he came in and people were worried about his work ethic, but he put his head down and he worked and he earned, making this team throughout preseason and training camp. And you saw him kind of pay dividends towards the back half of the year where he started getting more reps, got more comfortable, started making some splash plays. So he has to be a part of, this transition at defensive tackle as well. He has to be part of the future. When you talk about, the Jets essentially not drafting somebody this year, don't forget they still have a young Leonard Taylor that's only going into his second year.
All right, listen. You have the unenviable task of delivering draft grades for all these teams. When we all know that you really can't grade a draft class, until 2 years down the road. With that being said, we got to end here and say, what are you giving the Jets?
I gave the Jets in my draft grade, I gave them a B-. I thought they filled some really good voids when you talk about Armand Membu and Mason Taylor. Obviously, getting Thomas was a bonus in the 3rd round because of value, but I think, when it comes to missing out on a defensive tackle and a defensive tackle-rich class, that's why I kind of slided the Jets a little bit and gave them a B- because I thought there was so much value still out there, even in the 3rd or 4th rounds, that they could have attacked that and then essentially let somebody grow with Leonard Taylor and Quinnen Williams. But other than that, I love what the Jets did in regards to Malachi Moore. I think he's a guy, again, that makes that transition to strong safety. And you look at Mauigoa is a physical guy that will probably start off on special teams. I think Barron can have a nice role. He could potentially compete to be that swing defensive end or edge guy for the Jets in his rookie year.
Hey, man. Hell of a job throughout this thing. It's been quite a run as always. And remember, next year, when Deuce starts making his predictions, he had Armand Membu going to the Jets early on.
Sure did.
Thanks, brother.